Hello and welcome to Innovation Bites, the podcast where we take a deep dive into the tastiest and most exciting parts of the Australian innovation ecosystem. My name is Gavin Heaton, and Innovation Bites is brought to you by Disruptors Co, recorded at Quantum Terminal on the lands of the Gadigal People of the Eora Nation. One of the questions I'm often asked is, what is the Australian innovation ecosystem? And the answer is quite difficult to pin down, partly because as an ecosystem, it's something that is always evolving and it changes over time. So, for example, it is different now than it was pre-pandemic. The way I see it is that it includes a range of organisations, people, institutions, activities and events that all play a role in creating impact at scale. This constantly changing shape is both a strength and a weakness. It's great because, on one hand, it allows you to come in, go out, leave, transform, change over time. And so you have lots of transformation taking place. You have lots of people in, lots of people out, disappearing, coming back. But it also means that because of that, it's quite difficult to understand where people are at any one point in time. You wonder who is still in business. You wonder if someone's closed down, if they're growing, whether they're scaling. You wonder who is gone and where have they gone to. And you wonder when people are back until you see them and then you're like, oh, you're back. Interestingly, that means that there is a dynamic to an innovation ecosystem that is lacking in many other organisations and ecosystems as well. But one of the people that has been rock solid in the Australian innovation ecosystem for some time is Peter Laurie. We worked with Pete on our very first Qantas hackathon way back in 2015. And if you are a startup in Australia, it's likely that you have seen, heard, or maybe even been mentored by Pete. He is amazing in his depth of knowledge and experience, but he's also well known for his candor. So he'll tell you straight about your idea and your business and your model and your technology. But he's also well known for his creative visions and illustrations of how business, technology, and everything comes together in order to build businesses. And you may have seen some of these on LinkedIn, on social media, and so on. So I'm very excited today to be able to welcome Pete Laurie to the Innovation Bites podcast. Let's get into it.
So my name, like you said, Gavin, is Peter Laurie. I do a lot of stuff in the startup ecosystem in Australia, based out of Brisbane. So I do a lot of stuff in Brisbane and Queensland, a little bit the Gold Coast, a little bit the Sunshine Coast, and a lot into the Cairns, actually. A lot of stuff into Melbourne over the last few years, and then a little bit into Sydney recently, where I dropped in on you.
Yeah, for sure. One of the things that I like about you, Pete, apart from your straight shooting, is the fact that you've seen a lot of the growth of the startup ecosystem from the beginning. So maybe you could give us a bit of a background on some of the things you've seen in the early days, and then what you've seen work and what hasn't worked, and then maybe some things around what's happening now and into the future.
Okay. Yeah. So a lot of where I started working with this is in the Brisbane ecosystem, and there was a watershed moment in about 2012 where a co-working space called River City Labs was opened up that a guy called Steve Baxter kicked off, put his money where his mouth is and made it happen. There was a lot of things that were happening before that, so iLab and a lot of other things that were there, but that was really a moment where a lot of stuff started kicking off. And I've been the mentor in residence there since it opened. Now it's called mentor in residence instead of entrepreneur in residence because I didn't feel like I was an entrepreneur. But you know, as Joe pointed out the other day to me, the business has been in business for 20 years now, so I've got to claim some sort of success, even if it's just about staying alive. So I've been sticking my nose into other people's business since then, which is good because they unify against me and chase me away with pitchforks and torches when I do that, but they do it as a team. So the important thing is they do it as a team.
The team.
The team. They're doing it. They're together. They're collaborating on getting rid of me. So it's good like that. So I've seen it evolve through it's a bit of hype and a lot of people coming into the ecosystem that probably are there more for the free beer and free pizza than they are to do the entrepreneurship stuff. And part of my role has been unofficial role has been trying to capture the people that really should have been there anyway, or we've been lucky enough to catch. So all in all, it's been especially over the last few years, it's been 17 programs as an entrepreneur in residence in either pre-accelerator or accelerator programs. And then probably working with somewhere between 200 and 300 teams in program. So this isn't just the ones that I talk to. These are the ones that are actually in program of over 5 weeks to 6 months. I do a little bit of angel investing as well, and work with teams and catch them as they come through, because not everybody wants to identify as being in a startup. They're not 19-year-old. They don't skate to work, so they don't think they're a startup. So I spent a bunch of time trying to reach out to people beyond those that identify as a startup.
Interesting. And is there something about that? Like, are you seeing those non-identifying startups being more successful, less successful?
Yeah, it's interesting. So some of the couple that I've worked with outside of that are very successful. So there's one particular one called Explorate that I was in early with, when there were 2 guys in a garage and they had a cardboard feature wall that separated them in the cars. And they're now 70 odd people. They're in Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, Adelaide, and about to open in Perth. They're a digital freight forwarder. They were participating in the ecosystem, but not through programs. So they came from industry and looked at it and thought, it doesn't really feel right for me. So I've done a lot of work with them. I think that they were good anyway. They were going to find it. There were aspects that they wouldn't have got to if they didn't have someone like me connecting them in. That's not to big moat myself. That's just saying it's not as safe outside as I made it sound to start with. I think there's a lot of opportunity out there that people don't realize that's on offer through that investment community that looks at startups. So they tend to do bootstrapping, which is great, unless you've got an opportunity to do significantly better by taking investment. And if you're not participating in this ecosystem, then you don't really get exposed to that opportunity. So it won't show up as a loss. It's more of an opportunity loss, right?
Right. It's a growth gap.
Yeah. So I mean, they're doing great, but they might have had an opportunity to do 10x or 100x because they were sort of operating in a cash constrained mode, which is robust, but it's not. They might have just missed an opportunity there.
And is that a mindset thing, or is it just an opportunity or access challenge?
I think it comes back to that identifying with it. One of the problems that we've got across, well, you could probably say the world, but across certainly the places that I operate, is that there's a feeling, and certainly the corporate area as well, there's a feeling that this startup thing is all about bad pizza, bad beer, ping pong tables, and beanbags, right? And that's where the innovation comes from. And so the co-working spaces, to a certain extent, and programs and innovation spaces and those sorts of things tend to put ping pong tables in and have bad beer and have bad pizza nights. And that doesn't attract the type of businesses that we'd love to have. And it also misses out on a class of people that either can't get there at night or that just don't want to have bad pizza and bad beer and play ping pong, right? So I think we've got to... Yeah, it's right. I mean, I want to have ritual burnings of ping pong tables when I see them in startup spaces. We spoke about that one the other day. So I think we've got a bit of an identity problem there with who we can bring in and who we welcome in and who feels comfortable in some of these places. Right. And part of it, without going too deep into it, I think part of it is the way we measure the performance of these spaces is its number of people that turn up to an event or number of people that are there. And that pins the content that we tend to give or that tends to be given as intro stuff.
Right.
And we're missing the measure of having a tight group with 5 people who it's the highlight of the year for and has totally transformed their business. They don't show up well in the metrics of bums on seats, right? So, we're getting a bit negative.
That's great. No, that's really good. I think it's very useful because I think sometimes we get caught up with what's the newest and shiniest, whereas in fact what we're trying to do is create a robust ecosystem and some depth to the ecosystem as well.
Yeah. Well, and solving hard, valuable problems, right? So one of the big insights that I see, I think it's an insight, is that we've got a lot of people trying to solve hard problems. It doesn't necessarily make them valuable. It also means that there's a distressing amount of simple problems just sitting there waiting to be solved, so valuable, simple ones. But I'd like to be able to get people to think or to be working on valuable hard problems rather than just hard problems or just interesting problems, but actually valuable hard problems. And this is an area where I think corporate can do a lot better, is because they're sitting on a whole bunch of valuable hard problems. Now, because we've done work around this, or I've helped you guys do work around this one before, it's the part of the problem is them putting forward their problem. They feel like it's opening, well, that's a bad analogy. So it's feeling like they're oversharing.
Yes,
and it's exposing too much of their business to their competitors or to the general market, so they won't talk about their problems, right? Indeed. But from my perspective, there's people that are there that can solve these valuable hard problems. They just don't know they exist.
There's absolutely a mismatch there, for sure.
Yeah.
And so over the years, you've seen lots of different types of startups, lots of different types of programs. What are some of the things that you feel do work?
So for me, I think there's a problem in general with, and this is one of my soapboxes, one of the hills I'm happy to die on, is that a program, it's hard to have a program or a coursework for the teams that I work with. Well, in any of the accelerator programs, and the programs where we try to say, okay, this week we're doing marketing, this week we're doing growth, this week we're doing finance, this week we're doing legal. It's very hard to have a cohort that needs all the same things at the same time to the same level of depth.
Yes.
So I think that's a big problem. And the majority of really high impact stuff that I do is contextualizing that content to who I'm working with.
And where they are on their journey as well, yeah.
Yeah, so I go to meet them rather than ask them to come and stand in my factory and go through each part of it, which puts a lot of pressure on me. But I'm up for that, right? I'm a first week word. I'll take it to do that. But and the other problem is that we tend to think that the way out of this, or the way to solve it, is to actually have a plan. And I spent a bunch of time talking about this as well. That the plan's a lie. There's no such plan. And that when we're working into the spaces we're trying to get to, it's not even unknown. So it's not through a lack of effort. It's not through a lack of understanding or experience or insight. It's not that it's unknown through that. It's actually unknowable. So a lot of the things that we're trying to do, for us to have a perfect plan, we need to have perfect information. And we'd need to know not only whether we can do it and have a coherent plan, but we'd also need to understand what everybody else on the planet's doing. And we're never going to have that information. And our plan only makes sense when we've got that. So our plan will always have to adjust. So I spent a bunch of time trying to get people to operate in that uncertainty, right? I did a session yesterday.
High trust.
Yeah. Well, it is high trust, and it's high discipline as well.
Yeah.
If part of the problem, and I presented this one up in recently, part of the problem is that saying that we don't know exactly what we're doing, but we've got a plan on how to work in that environment and trust us, presents, which is a high art, probably correct answer, presents exactly the same to someone who doesn't really know how these things work as someone who doesn't have a plan at all.
Right.
So
yes,
the naive action looks an awful lot like the genius action, and it's hard to tell the difference. Right?
I was going to say, how do you tell the difference?
Well, I was literally just talking to another business before, and they're going for investment. They've got part of investment, and they need to fill out the rest of their round. And I said, they took me through what they're up to and how they're working. And I've spoken to them before, and I told them that the attribute that I was very interested in what they're doing in the stories they told is that they're under control.
Right.
It's not whether they made a good decision, bad decision. It's not whether they had a good outcome or bad outcome. It's actually about whether they made good decision, bad decision. And the decisions they were making were all good and rational.
Right.
The outcomes weren't, but half the time you don't control, probably more than half the time, you don't control the outcome. And you can only control the quality of your decision making. And it's a concept called resulting or outcome bias, where you measure the quality of your decision by the results you get, which is a false signal, because sometimes you don't control it. You made the right move, you just got blindsided by something that nobody could have seen, which makes it a hard environment to learn in.
But the learning part is the important part, right?
Yeah. And so their big thing was just making sure that they can communicate that, look, we've learned a whole bunch of things for this. We can't guarantee we won't make mistakes in the future, but we can guarantee we'll learn from them and we'll make better mistakes in the future.
Better mistakes, yeah.
And that, for me, makes that particular business look super attractive as an investor. The problem is that I'm not the guy sitting on the investment committee, right? Or the person sitting on the investment committee, because they've got a different problem. They've got a bunch of money from someone else that they've said we're going to find a good return. So they're concerned. They're as at risk as the startup founder is. Right?
That's it.
Yeah.
So that's fascinating and rather great insight. If you were thinking about the future and what we're doing well, what comes to mind?
The big thing that I'm still involved in programs because of the contextual learning and because of the cohort. One of the big things that I talk about is that I say that nobody knows what you need to be doing. So I sort of diffuse this whole Peter knows what he's doing thing, which takes a lot of pressure off me, but it's also to a certain extent true because I don't know what each of their businesses should be doing. And that flips it into a let's work it out, right?
Right.
And that let's work it out thing's actually super collaborative. And I talk to all the programs that I do stuff in, saying that the dirty little secret of all these programs is that you bring the majority of the value and it's up to us to unlock it and unleash
it. Yep.
Yeah. So I think that there's still a lot of value in the cohort and the shared experience of going through it. I think the standard coursework, once you get past an introductory level, is hard to justify. But contextualizing that into it is super important. There's a decent teaching and learning sort of model that can go with it. So I think a lot of people spend time around theory, an introduction to theory. It's actually not even very deep in the theory. It's more like reading from the book of startups, right? Let me tell you the fifth parable, right? But then you move into analysis where you start to look at that and look at other businesses and see how they've used it. And then synthesis, which is, okay, well, what are we going to do? And then there's the execution part. And I think there's a big opportunity to spend more time in a model that looks like that.
Yes.
And then on top of that, the thing with the programs is that it needs to be super iterative because you can't do it perfectly. You don't have time to do it perfectly. So you've got to learn through execution and go through that loop, so I think programs of some sort, or certainly the cohort aspect of it, will be here forever. And I'm spending a bunch of time trying to work out how that works properly in a larger environment. So we do that well. I think in Australia, we tend to not think big enough.
Right.
Our market isn't big, right? It doesn't really matter which way you cut, unless you're talking about resources, right? Maybe agritech, maybe some of the ag stuff, right? And maybe some of the energy export, right? So I think, but everything else, we're pretty small. And we're a test market for a lot of other markets.
Yes.
So I think part of what I try and get people to do is understand how big they could be, and then talk about that without sounding crazy.
It could be this big, right?
Well, it could be this big, but I know you're two guys in a garage, right? But you could really be this big, and you've got to talk about it as being that big. Otherwise, it's never going to be there.
Yeah.
Right? So I normally get people when you go.
I was just going to say, you were talking a little bit before about the idea of giving the founders permission to think big.
Yeah. It literally is like that. You sort of, you could say it's like giving them a safe space, but I normally say, I hereby say that you're allowed to think big, right? And they go, really? It's like, yes, I'll give you a certificate if you want, right? But, and the irony, it comes back to that investment stuff, is that the way that investment works is if it can't do a 10 to 50 to 100x return, they can't invest, right? That's the way the business model works. So it has to be big. So you've got to find a way to talk about it and think about it, but without sounding crazy. One of the tricks that I normally use when I'm talking to businesses, and for me it feels like a small thing, but people come back and say, Peter, that changed the way I thought. So they say, okay, what would you do with $1 million? And they go, geez, I don't know. And they sit down and they come up with a big plan, right? Yep. Cool, you've got that. What would you do with 10? And they look at me and go, what? Why are you doing this to us, right? And part of the reason it's a sweet spot it can make more sense to invest at a bigger level, which means you're talking to bigger investors. It can make more sense there. And then when they come back with the 10, I say, cool, now what would you do with 100?
100.
Right? Yeah. Right, then they pick the pattern and they don't come back. but the thinking is really good, and it opens up a lot of stuff. I mean, the other thing is what I was talking to the teams yesterday about was backcasting. So jumping into the future and then saying, well, let's pick a really good thing that we were doing. So that's a good outcome. And then work backwards, like to get that really good outcome, what must we have done? And then to get that thing, to do those things, what must we have done to get there? And then you can trace back all of the things that you've got, right, to work out what's important to be doing now. Now, the more observant people will realize that I've just taken two things out of a book called Thinking in Bets by Annie Duke. So if you want to read more around that stuff and some other things that are super relevant to startups, Thinking in Bets by Annie Duke. Right.
Awesome. That's great insights. Thanks so much, Pete. How do we find you? How do the listeners find you?
LinkedIn is PJ Laurie, I think I hide under there. And on the current internet hate machine that is Twitter or X or whatever it's called today, it's PJ Laurie as well.
Beautiful.
That's probably the best way to do it. Or email, which is peter@junta.com.au. So Junta or Janta.
Beautiful.
Or Junta, however you want to pronounce it. Right.
Awesome. That's great. I'll put those links in the show notes. Thanks so much for your time.
You're welcome, mate. Good to speak.
Now, I'm sure you'll agree that was a fantastic interview with Pete Laurie. But some of the things that were most important, or things that really stood out to me upon listening back, was his insights around some of the challenges that we face as founders, some of the insights that you have when you are able to step outside of that founder landscape a little bit. And more importantly, the idea of dreaming big and being able to follow that dream in a way that scales both your thinking and your ability to execute on that. So I hope you enjoyed this episode of Innovation Bites. We'll speak with you next time.